Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Maybe we'll briefly introduce ourselves. Does that be good?
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that sounded very loud. Hi, everyone. I'm Orianna Cacchione, Curator of Global Contemporary Art at the Smart Museum, and also a lecturer in the Department of Art History.
And the co-curator of this exhibition.
And the co-curator of this exhibition.
And I'm Christine Mehring, a faculty member in the Department of Art History, affiliated also with Visual Arts, and an adjunct faculty curator at the Smart Museum and co-curator of this exhibition.
And I'm Jessica Stockholder, faculty here in the Department of Visual Arts. I'm an artist and have a work in the exhibition, and I'm happy to be working with these two colleagues who I know well over some time here.
Jessica has a work in the exhibition, and she contributed a label to the exhibition.
True enough, yes, I did.
Like many other faculty and students on campus. So I think what we thought we would do is maybe give you a little bit of an introduction to the exhibition. Who has seen the show already? Okay, so seemingly about half of you.
Half.
So we will give you a little bit of a kind of introduction, probably some things that maybe you have noticed but have started thinking about. Hopefully it'll be a little bit new. And enough for those of you who haven't seen the show to know what we're talking about. You want to go to the first slide?
So when you walk into the Smart, we have actually started to activate the exhibition from the lobby. And so you come in to the exhibition, Monochrome Multitudes, and you experience a work by Haegu Young. This is a piece called Silhouette Upside Down, where she has turned upside down and expanded multiple times one of Silhouette's iconic cube sculptures from the 1970s. And she's actually made this sculpture with Venetian mini blinds. And so this is sort of the big entrance into the exhibition itself. And for this version, which is a work that we've commissioned for the Smart, Haegu asked us to vote on a blue color that we thought looked like International Yves Klein blue. And International Yves Klein blue is something that's going to come up over and over again on this exhibition about the monochrome. But together we sort of determined a system of voting, and then we selected 4 different shades of blue from our local hardware store, and collectively Christine and I and the exhibition team voted.
We had 5.
We had 5.
And we lost.
And
I was kind of upset. It actually was very meaningful because I think initially we were sort of half-jokingly doing this because it's a quasi-Yves Klein blue anyway, and it's
pseudo
unclear whether this is to be taken seriously or not. But this vote in the end was going to decide on the exact blue, and I felt as I was voting and as I was losing, I felt what should be the right blue. And as probably one of the 2 people who really had seen a lot of Yves Kleins, that maybe my vote should count a little bit more than other votes. And so we ended up having this pretty intense discussion about voting and how much votes count. And I suddenly realized I'm in some completely other world thinking about democracy and voting, that maybe I should back off a little bit about having my vote count more. Anyway, but I think in some, we're kind of diving into something very specific here. This work introduces the exhibition, and it introduces actually a lot of things that run as kind of red threads through the exhibition. One is, Orianna mentioned these mini blinds. The idea that the monochrome, which has been traditionally associated with painting mostly, actually can be thought about, and artists have been practicing monochrome art in all sorts of different materials and media. And Orianna and I both specialize in different parts of the world in artists who are working with non-traditional materials. You also work very much with non-traditional materials. And that was something that was really important to us, is to think about what is seemingly this very autonomous, abstract art that is removed from the world, that actually has a lot to do with the materials of the world and with also all sorts of non-traditional media and photography and video and all of these things that we don't tend to think about with monochrome art. Also, a monochrome art that, an exhibition that we really wanted to be global in scope. My work kind of goes across Europe and North America, and Orianna works on global contemporary art, primarily in Asia. We really wanted to have Latin American artists represented. We wanted to make sure we had diversity of gender, artists from lots of different types of backgrounds. That was important to us. And then lastly, the idea that all of these kinds of forms, materials, colors become meaningful beyond a kind of mere perceptual play, something that is merely formal, but that meanings actually are drawn from the world, from the culture around artists, have to do with gender, with race. We really wanted to explode the types of meanings that abstract art, and specifically monochrome, is usually associated with. And Haego Young's work really, really stands for this. And one of the things that's interesting about her is she was born in South Korea, still works there, is based in Berlin, teaches and is the co-rector of the Städteschule in Frankfurt, also often works in New York and goes back and forth. She really is one of those kind of global trotting artists. Do you want to say something about expanding narratives?
Yeah, happy
Or
to.
do you wanna chime in?
And so,
Well, I thought it might be good to introduce the show a little. And I thought, I mean, I think for me, the Alan McCollum, Arturo Herrera, the Alphonse Allais, I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, and you have a Malevich piece in there too. I think that's a nice, it's at the very beginning of the show. And I think it's a really nice introduction because all of those works kind of propose the idea of the monochrome. You know, the Arturo is a kind of a comic joke looking at pictures of the monochrome, and many people, I don't know if you guys in the room, but many people scratch their head and say, like, why is this art? You know, it's like so simple. And the Alphonse Malaise, what's the year of that?
Allais.
1897.
So it's like a really early book that's like kind of like a joke about, in a way it's kind of playing with, and there's humor in it about just the rectangle. So my appreciation for, had nothing to do with organizing the show. My appreciation for the show is that it proposes these ideas at the beginning, and the ideas are always really tied to material. You know, all the works in the show, it's not words, it's physical, visual things, and all of the different works take different material forms, different proportions. I kind of would question the merely formal. I don't think there's anything merely formal in the world, actually.
Oh, I see. You mean it doesn't even exist?
No,
Okay.
I think form is always full of significance. Whether it matters to you at any given moment in a context is another story. But so for me, the pleasure I love monochromes, and my work is in the show, and the show does stretch the definition of a monochrome, and my work certainly, I think, squeaks in as part of the stretching. And though my work isn't minimal, I think it grows from minimalism, and I love minimal work, and I love the proposal of the rectangle as such a full fact. And so I also, well, maybe I should stop and let you guys talk there. But I also love and like as you said, that all of these different works resonate and accumulate meaning in different ways in relationship to things in the world. So Dan Peterman's work, which is a whole bunch of wallboard, gyprock, and President Alvis Atos wrote the label for that, and he's a chemist, sorry. So he's describing, Dan's really focused on recycling and how a material, the systems and cycles of chemicals and things in the world in his work generally. And here he's really interested in the sulfur cycle, which gets deposited from waste into sheetrock. But those boards are rectangles. They're all the same color. That kind of consistent use of rectangles in the world around us all the time is mundane, so we think it's not very much to look at, but it didn't grow on a tree. You know, as humanity, we invented that form of building things and organizing thought. So that's, for me, the show is really beautiful in that way, that it opens up this very simple idea that so many people have a hard time entering, and provides lots of avenues to explore and access.
And that's what the idea of the multitudes also gets at. I mean, we really realized multitudes kind of entered in all of these different ways. It enters in terms of the different voices. We'll say something in a moment about all the different people who contributed labels on campus and beyond. The multitude of the different types of artists, the different types of media. Also, I should say, the multitude of sites. I hope you'll all pick one of these up. These are maps that actually is about monochrome everywhere on campus. There's a whole third floor of monochromes on the Booth School of Business, which unfortunately is closed on the weekends, but if you come back, many other sites on campus with monochromes that have their own labels, audio app, etc. But also, I guess you want to say something about expanding narratives?
Yeah, I
sort of
can.
up front?
Yeah, so a few years ago, maybe about 5 years ago, the Smart Museum started a new series of exhibitions called Expanding Narratives. That is a series of exhibitions that tries to critically engage with canonical histories. And so trying to think more expansively about art history, and really in particular, art history of the 20th and 21st centuries. And so you come together for this series and you start from a very specific art historical concept. So for this exhibition, we started from the monochrome, which is quite in many ways well-defined. It is defined through specific artists. It is often defined through the rectangle that is painted in a single color. And then to push and pull and complicate and stretch that meaning, as Jessica said.
Do you want to go to the Allee, maybe the Majewicz? Let's start with the Majewicz. So when you enter the exhibition, you encounter two works that were really fundamental for us in terms of thinking about this idea of expanding the monochrome. And one tends to, of course, I think very rightly want to know, well, so when did monochrome art start? And so there are probably about two moments that, if you ask me as a kind of Western modernist, what I would point to in terms of the sort of canonical understanding, what the first monochrome was, one candidate for this would be Majewicz's Black Square. Russian artist painted this black square on a white surface in 1915. Arguably maybe not a monochrome because it's still a black square on a white ground. Arguably maybe not even abstract, as I often discuss with my students, because Majewicz actually derived the idea from a stage set, the final stage set of an opera called The Victory Over the Sun, where man battles the sun and man wins and the sun loses. And so at the end of the play, at the end of the opera, it's all darkness. So it's actually just a black square in the back of the stage. So arguably this is a representational painting that represents darkness. At any rate, a few years ago, and this is really something that I think is important for especially a university museum to do, is to begin to think about what it means to showcase new research, the newest knowledge that has been produced about artworks like this. So a few years ago, conservators at the Tretyakov Gallery that own one of the versions of the Black Square did some imaging to look underneath the black surface. And they found an inscription in Majewicz handwriting of this racist inscription from this Allee album that Jessica mentioned. A battle of black men, Negroes, in a cave during the night or in a cellar during the night. Similar play with the kind of actual representational aspect of a seemingly black abstract surface, right? So we knew with this discovery that Majewicz actually knew this album by Alphonse Allais, who's part of a French artist group in the late 19th century called the Incoherents, that kind of poked fun at avant-garde art. We do that, many people do that today, I do it too. And people did that in the 19th century as well. And what's so extraordinary about this in many ways is that all of Majewicz's plays with kind of funny titles that actually run through his work seemingly came, now it was clear, from Allais. But also Allais actually in this album calls this series of 7 monochromes that are reproduced in this album, and some of them were actually exhibited, like this black painting by an artist named Paul Bilot. Allais calls these reproductions of monochromatic art. And the fact that basically with this Allais album, we have someone making fun of monochrome art and how monochrome art means before monochrome art actually existed. seemed really extraordinary to us. And so we're kind of proposing this as a kind of alternative beginning of monochrome art. And I want to just quickly add, at least here too, something that has been so amazing is to kind of find all the resources and work with so many different people on campus. So there were 2 copies when we were researching this in world libraries, one at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris and the other one in Geneva. And we were really determined to have it in the exhibition and thought, okay, let's try and find one in a private collection and fanned out with dealers and experts in 19th century French art. And we had kind of given up because the BN wouldn't lend. And a dealer had found a copy, and even though it was extremely expensive because it is extremely rare, the Special Collections, the Hannah Holborn Gray Special Collections Center in the Regenstein Library was able to acquire it with the support from some other colleagues. And so when the show closes, you can go into the Special Collections Research Center and actually flip through this album anytime. You want to say something about the Zeisler?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the Zeisler. And so sort of as Jessica had noted, you come in and you enter into this section about the monochrome. And in this section, you encounter different works that sort of set up the terms of the exhibition, including the allée that Christine just talked about, the amazing Harara that Jessica spoke about, and then also this work by Claire Zeisler that's actually in the Smart Museum's collection. And so for all of the Expanding Narratives exhibitions, they're really exhibitions that start from the museum's permanent collection. And it's a moment where we can really spend time researching and mining the collection and thinking more expansively about the collection. And so Claire Zeisler was a tapestry artist working in Chicago at the sort of turn of the century into the 60s and 70s. And this is a work that came into the collection in 1969. So it actually came to the museum's collection before the museum's building itself opened. And it's actually only been on view once before at the museum. And it became really this exceptional example of an artist who was critically and really intentionally looking at the history of the monochrome. And so here we have 3 primary colored rectangles, one red, one blue, one yellow. And for us, these related back to another example of an early 20th century monochrome also made by a revolutionary Russian painter. So this is Rodchenko's pure red color, pure yellow color, pure blue color from 1921. And so these are, again, 3 very flat paintings that are representing just the primary colors, and for Rodchenko represented this end of representation, a purity of just these colors. And you see Zeisler really exuberantly breaks that surface of the canvas. And so instead of using canvas at all, her rectangulars are actually made from rugs. And from the top center of each of these rugs are these exuberant falls. I think of them as ponytails that are extruding past the picture plane. And really critically engaging with that history. This is also a moment when craft practices are really distinguished and separated from what we would call high art. And also, high art was predominantly thought of as for men, or it was canonized, right? Mostly the histories that we have are written through male artists, and that's really starting to change. And so this work by Zeisler starts to get at all of those little pieces.
So the McCollum piece is, they're called surrogates, and he's made lots and lots. What's the date on this?
These are 83.
So I think he made a huge group of these, showed them in many different constellations, different colors, and they are stand-ins for paintings, he proposed. And in our world, I mean, you're all sitting in chairs that are the same. The world has been taken over by multiplicity of things that are the same. We all wear the same jeans and T-shirts, etc.
We have the same jacket.
Yes, here we are with the same Patagonia. So I think his work resonates with that accumulation of replication in our history. And at the same time, each one of them is made by him. Maybe he hired some people in his studio, I don't know. But they're made by people, and they have the marks of a person's hand on them. And Each one of them is a little different from the other. They're not all the same, but they all are reduced in this way to a rectangle inside of another rectangle inside of a frame. So in a way, they're a picture of the convention which usually asks us not to look at it. Like when you go in to see a movie in a theater, you're not asked to look at the walls. You're asked to forget them. And looking at a framed painting, the frame is backgrounded that way conventionally. It contains the thing that you're looking into. So he's deliberately proposing that we look at the frame and look at the convention that freights these things.
And so, yeah, so this is part of that early section that Jessica mentioned about the monochrome. And maybe we should say something about the way the exhibition is structured, which somehow, I don't even know, it just kind of fell into our lap. And it, for us, makes so much sense now. We can't, I don't think about any other structure anymore. So there are two different types of rooms that you will encounter. And we hope that that's going to be pretty easily and quickly obvious as you walk in. There are these sections that are thematic, where things look very, very different from one another, and you're wondering, like, wow, what does all of this stuff have to do together with one another? And they tend to be, they're thematic sections. So this section is called About the Monochrome, with artists reflecting on the history of the monochrome, reflecting at a kind of meta level about the monochrome, and McCollum is a really good example of that. And then there are, here, just facing that section is the first monochrome section. So this is the yellow section. We also have a red one and a blue one and the
Black,
gray one, black and white. So we kind of went with the primary colors. And the principle here is really very simple for both of them, really pretty basic kind of art historical, pedagogical, and also research tools, which is we tend to compare things and kind of look at differences and look at similarities. So things that look very different in a certain period, art historians try to find kind of, how they might relate and what an artist maybe was thinking or what artworks might share in a given period. Or often as a pedagogical tool especially, I will show two things that look very similar, 6, 7, 10 different yellow monochromes. And you will very quickly realize the differences. One is a metal sculpture that's painted, there's a chair, there's a photograph with a yellow house painted, a freestanding sculpture, a wool spill. And you quickly, I think, realize that these maybe don't have that much to do with one another, and that these artists work with yellow monochromes for totally different reasons. And with these two different types of rooms, we hope, that we can address two very different types of audiences that actually come to the Smart Museum specifically. Abstract art and probably monochrome art, I want to say, might be one of the most difficult types of art that you can encounter, and where many people will say, why is this art, or I can do that too. And and it's, of course, it's a funny thing to say, and the Arturo Herrera that Jessica was pointing to earlier really takes that up. But I also want to take that seriously, and I feel like, especially in the classroom, as a faculty member teaching art, I have to take it seriously. If I can't try to answer that question, I like to say I shouldn't have my job. And so this exhibition really wants to kind of help people get there, but also maybe present surprises to people who know a lot about this type of art already, and really think about how can one present an exhibition to these different types of audiences together.
Should we talk about labels?
Yeah, let's say something about labels and the white room.
So we're bringing you into the white room, which is one of the third spaces that you would enter when you come into the exhibition, is also where Jessica's work is standing very prominently. Usually in exhibitions, and I think for Christine and I coming into this project, this is an opportunity to rethink some basic standard museum practices. And one of those practices is the wall label, which generally is sort of written in an unauthored, authoritative museum voice. And for us, what we wanted to be able to do was to be able to author and to be able to identify who was speaking throughout the exhibition. So it's not just a curatorial voice that you hear throughout the exhibition, but we actually have the voices of faculty members, we have the voices of our students, we have the voices of alumni, and we have the voices of other supporters of the museum. And each label, and maybe I'll just move ahead quickly to the label that Jessica wrote for us, actually.
Say how that came about.
Well, you invited me to write a label, and I chose to write about Raymond's work.
So if you know Jessica's work, Jessica works usually with a lot of different colors in a given artwork, and it was really surprising to us. She picked this Robert Raymond painting. You want to say something about why?
Yeah, I love Robert Raymond's work. I think because of the materiality of it, it's very hard to say. I mean, I love minimal work generally, and like why? It's very hard to say why. They're all white, more or less. If you look at this picture, it's white, but it's got a lot of color in it. It has a green underpainting, and then there's a kind of floating after image thing that happens where a lot of the white looks yellow if you let your eyes linger on it. And I don't know why that is. I mean, if you know complementary colors, purple yields a yellow after image, red yields a green one, and things like that. So where that yellow comes from, kind of this atmospheric yellow, is kind of a mystery to me in that painting, and it's really beautiful. And his white paintings, he makes white paintings generally, mostly all white paintings, and the scale of the brushes he used will be different, and the way in which the marks all have a kind of gesture of hand in them. They're handmade. They want to reveal that they're handmade. And then this one's on canvas, but some of them are on metal, different kinds of linen and canvas. So the materials that he's working with are part and parcel of the image he's making. The canvas is both a picture, something you can look into, see illusions of things that the color yields, but you also are drawn very much into the materiality of the work. And my work is very similar. I'm really interested in the kind of interrelationship between image and materials, and a kind of pictorial way of looking, where you're looking at a picture of my work now. It's flat, but when you see the work in person, the notion that a picture-making event happens, but then it kind of gets broken down as the material, awareness of the materials and their weight and volume and all disturb that flatness, that flat way of looking. So I really, for whatever reasons, I'm really in love with that duality in my own experience of other people's work, and it's what I like to make. And this work of mine is a rare work that has a lot less color in it than mostly. I do love color.
We were surprised that Jessica actually made a monochrome work. We thought she wasn't going to be in the show.
I think it almost qualifies. So, and here I'm interested in like the different, the subtlety of difference between the different whites and in materials that come to me. Like the ceiling tile is white, the stool is white, and then there's also paint that has very tiny bits of pigment in it that shift the tone of the white. So yeah, I've always loved Raymond's work that way because of its, the material qualities of it. I think it also proposes the rectangle as part of the subject. And that's true in my work too, though my work tends not to be rectilinear. It doesn't exist inside of a rectangle. Rectilinearity in the frame is part of my subject. And Raymond's work and other people who were working at that time, that's part of what their subject was too. And white, particularly in the context of the White Room, has been proposed as neutral for art exhibition. The white cube is much talked about, and gallery walls are white because they're proposed as neutral. And then there's a long history of questioning that neutrality. I mean, what's neutral about a gallery or a museum? Why is white neutral? So that's also, I think, a lot of subject matter. Yeah.
And maybe say a few more things about these labels, which just became a really important aspect of the way in which this exhibition is about multitudes, the multitudes of voices. And Jessica said, we asked her to write a label, and she just picked one. That happened with a lot of people where we felt, we've been talking to them, or just people we wanted their voices represented in the exhibition, people who we knew were experts on certain things. We actually often said, hey, can you please write on this work, because we know you know a lot about this. But it was really important to us to not just have art historians or even artists, who of course have a certain degree of expertise, which was important to represent. But there are so many artworks that actually open up to other areas and other disciplines. And we're at a great university with so many other experts in all these different areas. And often that meant it was very obvious. So we have the Frankenthaler.
Yep.
So this painting by Helen Frankenthaler, kind of post-second generation abstract expressionist artist, called Focus on Mars from 1976. We pretty quickly thought, like, focus on Mars, what, something about this title, we want to kind of have someone address that. So that was easy. We went straight to Angela Linto, who's the dean of the physical science division and an astrophysicist. And Angela immediately said, oh, of course, because in 1976 we started having the first photographs of Mars. And so she wrote about the differences between the red planet and this blue painting and these first photographs. On the other hand, with someone like Farah Peterson from the law school, we weren't quite sure. I knew Farah a little bit, had started talking to her, just think she's just so brilliant in all that she does. And she had this sort of interest in art and was a little bit shy and held back about that, but was often asking me questions about this artwork or that. And I thought, let's just ask her. And there was another work in the exhibition that, to me, maybe had something to do with sentencing. And so I'd ask her whether she wanted to write about that. And she said, this just seemed like a ridiculous stretch, Christine. No, that doesn't make any sense. What else do you have? So then I sent her the whole list. And she picked this work by Bethany Collins called Pattern or Practice, without actually seeing it. And she said, well, of course I should write about this one because this is about a legal concept, which we didn't know this was a legal concept. Here we were planning to have this work. We didn't even completely understand it. And actually makes perfect sense that what the legal concept is, because this is a work that has embossed in it. It's impossible to reproduce, so you really have to go see the show.
You have to see it.
The text, it's text pages that are embossed. You can barely read it, of the Ferguson police reports. And then it is called pattern or practice because to prosecute police, you have to either establish a pattern or a practice of discrimination. So it all made perfect sense. I also like to say that Farah's label was the only one where we didn't have to change a single word. Nobody in the entire editorial process, which I don't think ever happens in a museum with an object label. It was really absolutely perfect.
It's the best label ever.
Yeah, really.
I would just,
And I don't even have it up. I'm so disappointed.
I'd just like to add that I really appreciate the putting someone's voice and person to the labels, aside from who they are, because I don't really like going into a museum and seeing a label next to something that came from nobody, like somehow it came from God or we're supposed to believe it. There's so many ways to make sense of visual art objects. And to propose the label as somehow the end, ultimate, last word authority on an object doesn't do any of us a service. So I really appreciate the personal labels.
Thank you. And of course, it was also an amazing opportunity for so many students to kind of have some professional experience. And I should say here, we had close to a dozen interns on the exhibition over a year. They did all the research on all the artists. So when we invited others to write labels, we could give them a folder and say, here's some background if you want it, take it or leave it. What else do we have?
Lots. Should we talk about?
Maybe 5 more minutes and then we'll take some questions. Does that sound good?
Or Jessica, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I could talk, since you're looking there at that projection. I enjoyed whose work is that?
This is
That's Tobias Rehberger, and then you
Rehberger.
had said the Wade Guyton is on the right there.
Yeah, the Wade Guyton is. But I also I put together, though these are in different rooms, the Rehberger with the video artist who has the tape,
Davidovich.
Jaime Davidovich.
the tape, and then the Terrell. This is video work with television, kind of like a painting on the wall, except it's moving with these colored tapes filling it. And I don't know how long it is. How long is it altogether?
34 minutes.
So I think I enjoyed these works that propose time as part of the monochrome. And the Rehberger is a very extended piece of time. How many years is it?
81.
81 years.
81 years of slow color changing. And the Terrell piece, if you haven't seen it, even if you have seen it, you may never have noticed that it was a hole in the wall. It's a hole in the wall, but it looks like a kind of glowing television screen, and it's the shape of an old television screen. And then you have the sound room too, which is also another thing that takes place in time. So I enjoyed moving through the show, and so there you can pluck strings over the felt, and that makes sound that's amplified. So that piece of the monochrome show, I mean, it takes time to absorb anything. A picture is proposed as something static that doesn't take place in time, but of course your experience of it takes place in time, and your apprehension of it depends on what kind of light is there, and often what kind of time of day it is, and so time has to do with everything, whether you're trying to stop it and carry information through time unchanged, which I think paintings try to do in a sense, and books try to do, or whether you're attending to time. So I enjoyed dwelling with those kinds of questions in the show.
Maybe we should say something about the wall still, and the Peterman
About the wall,
closing. So as I mentioned at the beginning, and as maybe has become clear, this monochrome art opens up to so many different types of meanings and contexts. I mean, it's really endless, right? One that was really important to us, maybe the most pressing issue of our time, is sustainability and global warming. And museums are heavily implicated in that because under normal circumstances up until now, museums will mount exhibitions, and for every exhibition, new walls will get built, just the way a curator wants it for this particular exhibition, and then after 3 months, everything gets torn down and trashed. This is very different from, tearing a building down every 60 years or 100 years when it maybe no longer functions. And it's just a completely unsustainable practice. And museums are slowly beginning to understand that, I think, and to change this. Orianna had a pretty good understanding of which museums had already made some progress in terms of implementing movable, reusable wall systems, although there are not that many yet. So we really committed to using close to only movable, reusable walls for this exhibition. So the museum is actually, with this exhibition, going close to fully movable wall systems, right, with a few exceptions still in the show for the black box.
With a few exceptions. I think within the next year, we'll have shifted to a fully movable wall model.
And
That's
so
the
Orianna
goal.
worked with the installers to come up with a system that I think is absolutely beautiful.
You don't get a
If you go to the
here.
Peterman, you see a little bit of the
You
Ryman,
can,
for example,
yeah,
there is on one. So if actually two people can kind of just push these walls and position them in different ways. The big problem with that, though, was, well, this is great. Now we've done that. We felt so good about ourselves. Of course, not enough. But, how are people going to know? Nobody knows. And I kind of tried to convince Orianna maybe we should have some labels on these movable walls, because they were kind of freestanding monochromes. And I've done a lot of work on wall paintings. And, certainly I'm also responsible for having some design and furniture in the exhibition. In fact, I should briefly say the font for the exhibition, which looks kind of playful, is designed by an artist named Joe Scanlon, who based this font on an artwork by Blakey Palermo, who I've done a lot of work on, and chopped up an artwork by him, virtually, to create a font. And we licensed the font for the exhibition, but we also put it on view. So design and objects from the world kind of run through this exhibition. At any rate, so it seemed to me, well, if we're putting some design into the exhibition, maybe we should just exhibit these walls as objects while we're also putting art on the walls. But I think that was pushing Orianna a little too far. And I kind of got it, like, I don't want to pretend to be an artist here and, like, show these objects, or a designer. So instead, we went to an artist who's done a lot of work on sustainability, named Dan Peterman, who proposed a version of this work that you see here in the foreground.
This is a really interesting piece. Dan's interested in questions of cycles and waste and use streams. And so he gave a talk actually on Thursday night, which was really exceptional, and spoke a lot about when he starts to think about a work for a new place, he often goes to the dump. And so, right, to see how garbage and things and items are being used and discarded and thrown away. And so his work is really focused on breaking these cycles or intervening into open cycles, right? So a cycle where you have something, you use it, and you throw it away. And in the 1990s, when the Museum of Contemporary Art was building a new building, Dan started a piece where he collected drywall that was the equivalent of 1 ton of sulfur, because most synthetic drywall is made through sulfur capture of carbon plants. And he took those original boards and he actually had them installed into the new MCA building. And just this fall, he went back and he excavated those original pieces of drywall that were put into the building in the 1990s. And he made a wall painting from those pieces of drywall that he got. And so he connected that here to this stack of drywall that represents about the amount of drywall that's needed for a small apartment on the south side of Chicago. And at the end of this exhibition, this drywall will actually move from the museum to a housing project here in Chicago, which is really exceptional. So thinking about those cycles, but really making those cycles visible so that we actually see and understand the waste, the material.
And so in the exhibition, it basically became a pedestal for other artworks, which is what you see on top there. Should we open it up to questions?
Yeah.
I'm curious, so how would you answer the question if anyone could make this kind of art?
I mean, my first instinct often is, go do it.
I would say the same. And then you'll see the plethora of choices you have to make making this art, and you'll either be bored or you'll be seduced.
I mean, that's exactly one of the things that's so amazing to see with monochrome art, where you seem to think, well, okay, so I'll make a yellow painting. Well, there's so many choices you have to make. I mean, Robert Wyman built his entire career around only making white paintings. What ground, which paint, what type of brush, are you going to paint? Are you going to spray? How big? How deep? How are you going to attach it? Are you going to sign it?
But so then there's a question there too. Embedded in that question is a question of skill versus idea.
Right.
And so I would say, looking at Robert Ryman's work, it's a very simple idea with a lot of resonance, and you might look at it and say, oh, I could do that. But actually, if you pick up paint and canvas, you'll find that your application of paint won't look like his at all, unless you get very practiced at replicating that, which anybody can do. You could become a counterfeit sort of artist, or you could propose it as an idea. You could not be counterfeit, but I'm making Ryman paintings again, you could say. And you could learn how to do that. So skill, and there's a lot of, in the history of contemporary art, there's a lot of conversation about the relationship between skill and content. And there are lots of artists who hire people, always have been, who hire people to manufacture their work and take advantage of somebody else's skill. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it depends who you are and how you feel about these things. I find in my own work and what I care about in art, just personally, I care a lot about the kind of thinking that takes place through making. And that can involve skill and accident and ideas. But you can't have somebody else do that thinking for you exactly. But I also appreciate lots of work that somebody else made for an artist. I'm not like doctrinaire about it. So it depends what you're looking for, what you care about in the world.
And I think that kind of thinking and meaning that results from that, and even very abstract art, comes about obviously through the combinations and all these different decisions that you're making. Somehow every decision, although many artists make them intuitively, they still then have resonance and mean somehow, right? And they mean in relationship to one another in a given artwork. But I think also across an artist's work and also across dialogues between other artists. So I guess that's another dimension to answering your question, is that if you just make one white painting, it depends a lot on what all the decisions that you're making and how those mean together. But it's not quite enough. Like an artist's work is also about several artworks that are made, say, in a given year, and how they relate to one another and can maybe drive a certain point or add to a certain dimension.
And how they resonate with other people's work that's happening. And I often say when I'm teaching, if there was one Robert Ryman painting in the world, no one would ever probably be talking about it.
Yes,
You know?
exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I guess like one thing that I'm sort of noticing as a theme in both the show and then the curation process is standards, right? And the idea of the monochrome as a kind of standardized object, both in kind of color and shape. And I just thought it was really interesting the way it seemed like you also set yourselves up for these kinds of almost like tasks of creating standards and then breaking standards, like with the voting on the blue, right, which comes out of a particular standard of blue. And then also curating the show in a way that the different rooms are different colors. I'm just curious about like moments where you felt like you were, I don't know, departing from those standards, or like what was sort of fruitful about setting up those exercises. I mean, even in like sort of doing something different with the wall labels, which are their own kind of standard monochrome that doesn't go question. But then in the end, the show is still in a white cube with white labels, right? You could have, I mean, I'm guessing you talked about. So I'm just sort of curious, like, where does, and Christine said, you know, maybe that was pushing too far to start turning the walls into art, but it feels like there's this whole frame that could be kind of broken in this way. I'm just curious to hear more.
I think that's what has been really like exciting and playful about this exhibition, because there's standards, but then there are also standards that we were constantly breaking. And so there are works that we considered at the very beginning that we thought immediately, oh, this could be a monochrome, and then fell off. And then there's other works at the very beginning that we looked at and thought, absolutely, this is not a monochrome, this can't be in. And then as we started to look at more artworks and build out different themes or areas, we could reconsider that work and it could come back in. And so for me, it just was this kind of constant contraction and expansion and of the theme in a way that was really playful. And this is also not an exhibition that is saying, this is a definitive definition on the monochrome. This is a show that's saying, this might have been a definitive definition of the monochrome, but let's think of it in a multitude of different ways. Let's completely complicate and blow up that process. And so for me, that was the playful part of it. And I don't know if I consciously thought going through the exhibition that we were developing standards at all.
I mean, I think we were often developing a certain standard or idea, and then the other person kind of pushed against it. You know, I mean, early on, we wanted to have the Rothko, Orianna said, like, well, our Rothko show, you know, everybody wants to see our Rothko, and we haven't shown it in so long. And I was like, no, absolutely not. This is not going to be in the show. There are lots of different reds in there. It's not monochrome, Orianna. And Orianna's like, well, it's just a different tone. They're all reds.
And then tone emerged as like this other concept that we had not thought about, because you don't think about tone with the monochrome. You think about a solid color.
Yeah. But that's a theme that then dropped out. But the notion of tonality became very prominent in the exhibition. You know, likewise, I felt, you know, I had done some work on abstract television art, and really, and I'm very interested in abstract photography. But to think about monochrome photography and monochrome film or video art seemed a little bit of a leap even for me. Although both of us knew about Eric Jarman's Blue, which is in the black box there. But then we kind of thought, you know, we have to somehow figure out how to bring in different reproductive media. And we really thought, we probably can't pull this off, but we weren't quite willing to let it go.
We were able to find an exceptional number. And then also, I mean, there's a whole group of younger, maybe not younger, but there's a whole group of recent artists who are very much thinking very specifically about the monochrome in video and photography, and I think especially first through the green screen. And that is one type of artwork that we don't have in the exhibition that I, in retrospect, wish we did.
I like your question, and when you say standards, I kind of, in my mind, fill in frames. I don't know if that resonates with you at all, but a standard or a frame you have, whenever you're curating anything, writing something, making art, you always have to have a sense of what the edges are you're working within, or else because you can't see the whole world at once, ever. So you have to find a way to edit out a small part of something to look at. And I think it would be really interesting to do another show, another time, where you did play with colors of labels. And of course, colors of walls have been played with a lot.
Yeah.
That would really muddy the waters here with the in order to experience that work. If you had colored walls, it would muddy. Because I think I'm not a curator, but I'm imagining when you curate a show, and I guess I've done a little curating in my way, you want to, if you're displaying somebody else's work, you want to give it a circumstance to be fully experienced on its own terms, even while you're making dialogue and creating a situation where things can speak to each other. So it's a complicated thing
I always
to do.
wonder whether that's something unsettling to an artist, to see their work in context that you didn't expect at all. There must be moments when you're not really happy about being juxtaposed with someone else's work, and then there are others where maybe you're surprised and you like it. And
Such a good question.
Yeah, I haven't experienced being unhappy so much about how it's juxtaposed, but certainly if it's not installed well, I'm not happy.
yeah, I would say in different ways, and they might not get completely to a satisfactory answer and to a kind of ideal way maybe of sharing, but I've done a lot of thinking about collection sharing, also partially with an eye to sustainability, because I think we have to stop shipping art all over the place and all across the globe all the time. It's just not sustainable. And I don't think we're making enough of local resources, especially in a large city like Chicago. And so one of the things that we did very, very consciously in this respect is to draw with some of the supplemental loans that we have. I mean, it's 60% permanent collection, 40% loans. Almost all of those are local loans. And that seemed important to us, is to kind of share what private individuals actually are holding in the city. And we purposely went to private individuals or foundations only, because those are often the works that are not seen by others, that are kind of hiding in people's living rooms. There are also works that maybe can enter the collection down the line, or other collections. And we also went to a few foundations, and some of these foundations are actually very much about collection sharing. So one is the Art Bridges Foundation in Alabama, that is all about sharing its own collection with smaller museums that may not have the resources to have an exceptional collection or all of these artworks that they own, or that may not have the resources to borrow artworks from other museums by a certain artist. So not only do they facilitate these loans of their collection very easily, they also award grants that then allow for the shipping and the candy piece that is in the Pixel to Pigment. Like they paid for the acquisition of the candy, which had to be custom made, and they also want these works to live in other institutions for longer than just a few months. So we actually, in that case, had to commit to keeping that work for an entire year.
A year and a half.
Which gets me to another dimension of this. So having the art not just in the museum, but all across the campus. In some places, public artworks one artwork that I've been working for a few years now and lobbying and trying to research the conservation of it by Jean Heichstein, A Black Sphere, was just delivered back to campus last Wednesday, and the conservation is getting finished. And art in public spaces is very much about sharing the art that the university owns, even more extremely so than the museum, which is free and accessible to everybody. So there's another dimension there also in terms of, but anyway, so this Felix Gonzalez Torres piece, this candy piece, will be with us for the entire year through December 2023. It is already installed both at the Smart Museum and also in the Media Arts and Design Center in the entry when you go in there. And then it will actually migrate across campus next year. So you will encounter it every 2 or 3 months in different spaces. Very much also in that sense, the kind of experiment with how an artwork means differently in different contexts, even though it is materially the same kind of artwork, right? So we're thinking about maybe bringing it to Bond Chapel or to the Oriental Institute and spaces like that.
And I can speak a little more to collecting. So for this exhibition, so far we've only made one purchase for the exhibition. It was a work by Jenny C. Jones, who's an African-American artist and very much interested in thinking about the ways in which histories have been silenced or suppressed. So she thinks a lot about music and sound and works with acoustic panels. And she's an artist that I've wanted to bring into the collection for years. But I also think that museums have a responsibility to support artistic practices that are critically important to expand the canon and to tell a story of different periods of art, but are often not market darlings. And this is a conversation that I had recently, maybe I could say an argument that I've had recently with our collections committee at the museum. So most museums have a collections committee. The collections committee ultimately reviews and approves or declines acquisitions that are coming in. And oftentimes there are artists, particularly artists who have a socially engaged practice perhaps, who do not have careers that are decidedly marketable or exist within a larger gallery system. And those conversations become really interesting because there's not necessarily a price history to justify what you're paying for an artwork. And so for me, making sure that we're supporting those practices that are often overlooked by the market is really important, but also too, thinking about what are the artworks that are important now, but more importantly are going to be important in the future. And I think often the art market itself doesn't think that way.
Unfortunately, one more question, Wuhan. Last one.
Very strange question. Just in my any personal reaction, I understand the preparation for the show basically coincided with the global pandemic. So I just wonder, because when I look at these pictures, these are abstract art at all. But death and hygiene, these are all monochromatic in a way, black or white. I just wonder if it's not by design, but if in your dealing with these materials, were you somehow influenced by this larger environment? I mean, COVID, pandemic, death, anxiety, insecurity, also make everything clean, like our mask, everything. I just wonder if there anything, it's not really about the idea of the show, but I mean just art is a living thing, right? If there are any moments you feel any connection with this real.
We'll probably give different or maybe similar answers. I mean, I had the year prior, in the thick of the beginning of the pandemic, done this university commission of Jenny Holzer, which was an augmented reality app, virtual reality, where you could project Jenny's work onto university buildings. For me, that was sort of the quintessential pandemic work because you could be outside, you could project, etc. So it's almost like I want to say I kind of got it out of my system to do a work that was very much about and kind of embedded in the pandemic. But that said, while it wasn't the kind of driving main reason for me, I actually don't like to travel that much. You know, it's one of the reasons why I didn't become a curator. I can't live the life of just kind of constantly being on the go and seeing all this art all over the world and talking to so many different people. I really, really don't like that. Although I love talking to people, but not, you know, like to a degree. So for me, going to local resources was, you know, maybe something that suited my personality, suited, you know, questions around sustainability, but also I think was something that made sense during the pandemic, because I don't think either of us wanted to travel that much. And then there's some artworks that are also about the pandemic, like the Rashid Johnson.
Oh, the Rashid Johnson is about the pandemic. I didn't think about that. I think Wuhong, as you know, we had an exhibition close 5 weeks into the pandemic. And so having come from that experience and the grief of that experience of the early closure, like coming back and curating the show was really exciting. And I think, you know, the pandemic infiltrated in ways that were very practical concerns of getting COVID, or also people on the team getting COVID, and thinking about how we might mitigate risk and concern for the team and for the public. And so for me, the pandemic didn't infiltrate sort of thematically, although we have a single work that was made during the pandemic by Rashid Johnson. That's Anxious Red, untitled Anxious Red Drawing, which is made with a red oil stick that Rashid Johnson had produced during the pandemic that encapsulated sort of the sense of anxiety, but I also find them to be a bit of a release as well. But so my feeling is different somehow.
Yeah, another piece where it enters also is with these different spaces on campus. And again, I hope you'll pick up one of these maps. That was actually a little bit of a struggle, especially a year ago when we started planning this. You know, all of these buildings were closed, and many of these buildings have authority over their own buildings. So, you know, the Central University Administration can't say, hey, Booth School, you better open up your building for this exhibition. So there was a lot of negotiation with units, and it was interesting how every unit was actually thinking very differently about their kind of comfort levels, which is completely understandable in terms of letting the general public in again to see art that they had. Patrick? One more.
You talk about schools, movements, things like that. Do you think of the monochrome as a kind of school or a kind of movement?
I don't at all. I
No.
feel like it's something that many artists actually has become clear to me. I'm even surprised about how many artists at some point in their career go there. And some artists kind of make it their whole career, and then there are other artists, when you said you had made 2 monochromes, maybe, who, you know, for whom it's very rare or even very surprising. I think of it as a kind of limit case for artists.
It would have been a lovely thing to think of an art movement started by a joke.
Well,
I suspect that there are several trajectories in practice which are fed by a joke. I mean, I think Duchamp is somebody you could look at that way, but I ate a joke and so forth, and these things are all on. Anyway, I'll be quiet now.
yeah. Thank you all
Thank
so much.
you.